If you happen to dive 3,000 feet below the ocean surface, you'll notice something deeply wrong with the fish you find there. Their mouths are too big. Their teeth point the wrong direction. Their eyes are either enormous or completely useless. And some of them are dragging what looks like a glowing lantern from their own heads, which sounds almost cute until you realize what that lantern is actually for. But here's the thing. The anglerfish you just imagined. That's not even close to the worst version, because anglerfish get creepier the deeper down you go. And the ones living at the very bottom of the ocean look less like fish and more like something that crawled out of a nightmare someone had after eating bad sushi. So, why does this keep happening? Why does every extra 1,000 feet of depth turn this already bizarre animal into something progressively more horrifying? And why are anglerfish specifically so vulnerable to whatever the deep sea is doing to them? Let's start at the surface and work our way down, because the horror here is best understood as a slow descent. At around 600 feet down, you're in what scientists call the mesopelagic zone, the twilight zone. Sunlight barely reaches here, and when it does, it's just a faint blue glow. This is where you first meet anglerfish, and honestly, at this depth, they're almost manageable. The black-bellied dragonfish lives around here, and while it has a jaw that unhinges wide enough to swallow prey half its own body size, it's only about 6 inches long. So, terrifying in concept, not actually that threatening in practice. But what already starts to feel wrong is the bioluminescent lure. That glowing rod dangling from the female's forehead is called an esker, and it contains living bacteria that produce their own light. The anglerfish didn't grow a flashlight. It domesticated bacteria and turned them into a biological trap. That's not how normal animals work. That's not really how anything works. And evolution looked at that strategy and said, perfect. Let's build on this. Because once you descend past 3,000 feet into the bathypelagic zone, the midnight zone, the anglerfish you encounter there have been shaped by conditions so extreme that the ones above them start to look almost normal by comparison. No sunlight reaches here. None. The water temperature hovers just above freezing. The pressure is about 100 times what you feel at the surface, which is enough to crush an unprotected human lung instantly. And food is so scarce that some creatures here go months between meals. In this environment, evolution stopped caring about looking reasonable and started optimizing purely for survival. And what it came up with is the deep-sea anglerfish in its most recognizable and most disturbing form. The Melanocytus johnsoni, also called the black sea devil, lives at this depth. It looks like a floating head. Its body is almost entirely mouth, a mouth lined with translucent needle-like teeth that curve backward so anything that touches them can only go one way. The lure above its head glows in the total darkness, flickering slightly, mimicking something small and alive. When prey investigates, the anglerfish doesn't chase. It doesn't need to. It just opens its mouth, and the pressure differential pulls the prey in. And here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. We know basically none of this from live observation. Almost everything we understand about deep-sea anglerfish comes from dead specimens dragged up in trawl nets, usually destroyed by the pressure change on the way up. We've captured maybe a handful of them on video, ever, which means for most of what we know about how they behave, we're just guessing from what their bodies tell us. And their bodies tell a very dark story. The female, by the way, is the one with the lure. The male anglerfish is a completely different animal. Smaller, simpler, with no lure, no elaborate teeth, and no real purpose beyond one thing: finding a female. But finding a mate in total darkness, at crushing pressure, with almost no food anywhere, across thousands of miles of open ocean, is nearly impossible. So evolution came up with a solution that is genuinely one of the strangest things in all of biology. When a male deep-sea anglerfish finds a female, he bites into her side. And then he doesn't let go. His body slowly fuses with hers. His organs begin to dissolve. His eyes go. His digestive system goes. Eventually, he becomes nothing more than a sperm-producing attachment permanently grafted to the female's body, kept alive by her bloodstream. One female has been found with 8 males attached to her. If that seems like an extreme solution, consider the alternative. The deep sea is so vast and so dark and so empty that evolution decided the only reliable way to guarantee reproduction was to make the male permanently part of the female. The deep didn't just make anglerfish creepier to look at. It restructured their entire biology into something that doesn't really have an equivalent anywhere else on Earth. But we still haven't reached the deepest ones. Below 13,000 feet, you enter the abyssal zone. The pressure here is roughly 600 times what it is at the surface. The temperature is just barely above zero. There's no food falling from above because by the time organic matter sinks this far, most of it has already been consumed. Life here is so sparse that some animals have evolved to essentially slow their metabolism to almost nothing, drifting in a kind of suspended state, waiting. The Caulifrine jordani lives in this zone, the fanfin sea devil. Unlike the black sea devil, this one has fins that extend into long, thin filaments trailing out from its body in every direction, some of them longer than the fish itself. These filaments are lined with touch receptors. In a zone where bioluminescence can actually betray your location to a predator, the fanfin sea devil hunts by feel. It hovers, perfectly still, those filaments spread wide in the darkness, waiting for the vibration of something moving nearby. We've filmed it exactly twice on camera. Both times it appeared out of nowhere, hung motionless for a moment, and then disappeared back into the dark. And even that isn't the end of the story. Because in the deepest parts of the ocean, the Hadal zone, the trenches that go below 20,000 feet, the anglerfish don't really go. The pressure there is so extreme, the food so non-existent, that even these animals have limits. But what lives just above the Hadal zone, in those final anglerfish accessible depths, are specimens we've barely catalogued. Species that were discovered from single specimens pulled up in trawl nets, examined once and never seen again. One of them, Lasiognathus sacostoma, has a lure that hangs from a long, articulated rod with what looks like a tiny hook at the end. Not a glowing orb. A hook, like someone miniaturized a fishing lure and put it inside an already horrifying fish. We think it mimics the movement of small crustaceans to attract prey. We're not certain. We found 3 specimens. One of them fell apart before it could be fully examined. So why does all of this keep getting more extreme the deeper you go? The answer is pressure. Not just the physical pressure of the water, but the evolutionary pressure of an environment that has no margin for error. At the surface, an animal that's 80% efficient at finding food survives fine. In the midnight zone, 80% efficient means death. Every unnecessary structure is a liability. Every gram of extra tissue costs calories the animal doesn't have. Evolution down here doesn't add features. It strips away everything that isn't absolutely necessary, and then it weaponizes what's left. The lure gets more elaborate because at those depths, every failed hunting attempt might be the difference between surviving and starving. The mouth gets bigger because when prey is rare, you cannot afford to miss. The male dissolves himself into the female because searching for a mate in the dark wastes energy the species doesn't have to spare. Every feature that seems bizarre or disturbing makes perfect sense once you understand the math of survival at depth. The deep sea doesn't make anglerfish creepy for no reason. It makes them creepy because creepy down there works. And here's what makes this genuinely unsettling to think about. We've mapped less than 25% of the deep ocean floor. The species we know, the black sea devil, the fanfin, the Lasiognathus, were all discovered more or less by accident, dragged up in nets that weren't even designed for them. For every anglerfish species we've catalogued, there are almost certainly others we haven't. Deeper ones. Ones that have been optimized by millions of years of darkness and pressure into forms we haven't encountered yet. And since most of them live in water we can barely reach, and since the ones we do pull up rarely survive the trip to the surface intact, we may never actually know what's down there, which is either fascinating or deeply uncomfortable depending on how you feel about the ocean in general. Personally, I think both.